a conservative comedian.
Mr. Reagan.
So the other day, I'm scrolling through YouTube, as usual, and I see this video pop up. It says, pro-life comedian. I'm like, pro-life comedian? Well, he certainly won't be funny, because I've seen videos of conservative comedians before. One of my favorites is Joe Mackey, very funny guy. But for the most part, conservative comedians aren't typically that funny, or at least openly conservative comedians. But this guy was hilarious. This guy was so funny. I found myself laughing hysterically throughout the video. And, why don't I just show it to you guys? Here, have a look at this clip. See for yourself. This guy is laugh out loud funny.
So you guys have kids? Yeah? You see, people say the day my child was born was the most beautiful, the most exciting day of my life. These people have clearly never been released from an Iranian prison. Am I right? Listen, guys, I feel there's a good vibe in this room. I feel the warmth. I feel safe, so I'm going to say something, and I don't care who hears this. I'm just going to say it, okay? I'm going to say it. Nazis were bad. Now, fast forward to our time, you tell the unborn baby, you got to die. Why? I tell you why. Because your mom needs to continue to do after-work drinks and Peloton. Do you know how much Peloton subscription costs? Yeah. A lot of women killing their babies for their careers. Can you imagine killing your baby for your career and still be paid 30% less than a man?
Commercial break.
Every day, it seems like we're inching ever closer to the apocalypse. Considering the disastrous policies of the current administration, it's terrifying to think what might happen if we get another 4 years. It's possible that the entire food supply chain could break down. So it's my personal view that we all need at least 3 months worth of food stocked up. Now, if you don't have that, you can go to preparewithmrreagan.com and get a 3-month emergency food kit from My Patriot Supply. And right now, they're offering this at $200 off. So it is a very good time to buy. This kit gives you breakfast, lunch, dinner, drinks, and snacks. Enough food for one person for 3 months. It provides over 2,000 calories a day for optimum strength and energy. And with this $200 off deal and free shipping, this might be a good time to stock up. And make sure you get one kit per person in your household so you don't run out. I was actually at one of these big box stores the other day, and I spotted their emergency rations kit, and My Patriot Supply is a way better deal, so I feel very confident selling this product. With the world on the brink, give yourself that sense of security. Go to preparewithmrreagan.com right now and keep your family safe. That's preparewithmrreagan.com. All right, so after watching this video, I was so impressed with this guy that I looked him up on Twitter and I wrote him a message. And I said, I want you to come on this show. And just as I was writing that message, I sent the video to my friend Sebastian Gorka, and I said, you got to get this guy on your show. And he wrote back to me, I've already seen this video, and I've already written this guy, and he's going to be on my show. So this guy's going to be on Sebastian Gorka's show today, which will have already aired by the time you guys see it. So he's already done a video. You can see that video on Rumble if you want to see that interview. But he agreed to come on my show, and so I've got him here, and he's going to answer some of my tough questions. His name is Nicholas De Santo. Nicholas De Santo, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you, Mr. Reagan.
All right, so I've got a number of very simple questions, but you're a fascinating person. Italian, born in Italy, from Iran, Persian, I guess people would call you. You lived in Germany for a while. Now you live in the UK. One of the most left-wing places on earth. I used to live in the UK myself, and you really can't be a conservative there and have friends. So I don't know how you can tolerate that. But why don't you the first question I have, why don't you give me just a brief summary of your life story? How did this happen? How did you become you?
As you mentioned, first of all, thanks for the invite. I'm honored to be on your show. As you mentioned, I have a mixed background. My father was a diplomat, so I was born in Italy. I lived in Italy, in Iran, in Germany, and now I'm a naturalized Brit.
So I have these mixed backgrounds, and in terms of my day job or previous job, I was a journalist in broadcast journalism. I worked with BBC World Service, and which, as you can imagine, is very much a left-leaning environment. And I had this side interest of comedy, for which London, England, is one of the main, one of the meccas. So I decided to do this comedy on the side, and gradually, as I realized that, stand up, pretty much like the other aspects of our culture and media, has been overtaken by the left. It's very much globalist, woke, leftist dominated. I try to, carve my own angle, carve my own niche, if you like, and use stand up to give a message and provide the audience with a different point of view. As you can imagine, as you probably agree with me, you go on Netflix, main TV channels, main festivals. It's all either mainstream non-political comedy, which is fine, but when it gets political or social commentary, is dominated by the lefties. And conservatives or right-wingers do not have platforms, and if they dare distance themselves from the so-called acceptable discourse, they are heavily punished. As you know, huge comedy A-listers have not been an exception to this, let alone people who are on lower levels, such as myself. So I thought, what? Comedy is tough. Making people is tough. Making people laugh is tough. And especially in London, England, the British sense of humor, everybody thinks they are a comedian, and there is more offer than demand. And then you have also a lot of competition for people, just to stay there in their homes. We are not in the 80s anymore. We are not in the golden age of stand-up comedy, because people have Netflix and YouTube and pay-per-view and cable TV. And of course, also the weather is bad. I joke about it, right. The English weather. So people stay at home rather than coming to clubs. And I thought, if I'm going to take trains and, take time away from my family, my children, to do stand-up comedy, I might as well do something that almost nobody else is doing. And because it's very important when you do comedy, they tell you one of the first things they teach you want to find your own voice. You want to stand out, as in any profession, but you want to be memorable. So people who, and of course, it's one of the best compliments that when I do go on stage and people at the end come and say, what, we've never heard anything like this. Nobody has gone in these areas stepped into tonight. So that's the best compliment. And you make yourself stand out and memorable. And of course, there are the risks. But at the end of the day, you are giving the audience something that nobody else is offering them.
Yeah, I was just talking about this the other day, about how 80s actors, the most prominent 80s actors like Bill Murray or Sylvester Stallone or somebody like Christopher Walken, actors like this, they're not necessarily the kind of people that in normal life you might just meet, right? They're not like a regular person. They've got these very distinctive personalities, and they become like the biggest stars in the world. And I think that that's a benefit. For whatever reason, people are gravitate toward people who are a little bit weird, people who are a little bit different, people have a very unique take on the world or a unique attitude. So I think that you're very wise to try to distinguish yourself in that way. You kind of explained why you got into comedy. It's just because it was something that you had as a side, as a hobby, something that you always kind of wanted to dive into, but you were doing other stuff there in England, and then you just went for it. And well, I got to say, you've been very successful in terms of your ability to perform the comedy. I don't know how successful you are as a comedian in terms of financially, but in terms of making people laugh, I think you're excellent. But I'm curious, I understand that you're saying you created a niche that would distinguish yourself from other comedians, but there must be some fundamental conservative ideas that you have that would allow you to be able to do that? Because I don't, or is it completely an act? I mean, are you just developing things based on the news that you see, or is this something that comes from values that you actually hold?
No, it is not an act in that sense. Obviously, as a comedian, yes, it's a comedy act, and not everything that you say is supposed to be taken literally. This is actually a very good point. A lot of comedians and so-called right-leaning or conservative comedians, when they get into trouble, one of their defenses or their big arguments is, it's just a joke. Why can't you take a joke? I'm joking. Come on, I'm joking, which is fine. Sometimes it is just a joke, and we need to be able to take a joke and laugh at ourselves. And I guess we all agree on that. And secondly, as I said, what if it's not just a joke? I mean, there has to be the joke or the funny element in it. Otherwise, it would be just, they call it preachy in the jargon, right? But when lefty comedians talk about, the racism and structural so-called, racism and the gender pay gap and, how terrible Trump was, and they make jokes which might not be that good, by the way, but doesn't that come from a genuine worldview? Of course it does. They truly believe, or most of them truly believe, that Trump was bad and Brexit was voted by racists and there is a gender pay gap. What if my joke also comes from a worldview? That has still, that must still have legitimacy. I come from an immigrant background, if you like, because I was born in a country where my parents were not born. So technically, I'm an immigrant, although a legal immigrant. And one big issue that you face as an immigrant, and of course, I'm sure in America it happens as well, is that once you come from an immigrant background, the left tends to take you for granted, and they expect you to vote for them. And here, pretty much as well. And of course, I say, wait a minute, isn't that the definition of pigeonholing? Isn't that the definition of racism? And of course, I make jokes about that, and that becomes, right-wing comedy. But the idea is, you can be of an immigrant background and believe in a small government, or believe in the right to bear arms, or believe in the First Amendment, right? So that's that. And I used to live in a Middle Eastern dictatorship as well. And we used to listen to these mainstream radio stations, be it BBC World or Voice of America in English, or even in other languages, Persian, Arabic, you name it. And the idea was that presumably these radio stations, funded by the American or the British or the European taxpayer, were supposed to be bastions and megaphones of the voice of the liberal in the noble sense of the term. As all these institutions were overtaken by the left, the message changed. So you can imagine the freedom-loving, or democracy-oriented audiences of these radio stations are sitting in their homes, and nowadays they are receiving just woke propaganda. It's all about climate change, or the climate change myth, and the gender pay gap, and LGBT doctrines. And then those of us who do make it here, we come here and we are being told that, Islam is compatible with the West, and mass immigration is good, and West was bad, and the Americans or the Brits must be ashamed of their history. And some of us are like, hang on a minute, this is not why we came here. We came here because we love these countries and we want these things, and you are destroying your own societies. So in terms of what comes from your personal history, there are different talking points, some of which are, of course, very much resonate with me, like the couple of examples I mentioned. And then some of them are not necessarily linked to my history. Like I don't have a history of abortion in my family, or it's just a very touchy issue. And how can you raise it? If not, I mean, even through the medium of comedy is very difficult and it's very challenging, but you can have the comedic defense, because you try to, as they say in Italian, sweeten this very bitter pill by packaging it in a comedy routine, which is which is kind of tough, but it's something that can be done, because ultimately, even though comedy and stand-up has been taken over by the West, by the left, just like academia and mainstream media and Hollywood, it is one of our last trenches, because at the end of the day, like a court gesture, you can say, oh, hang on, I'm just pointing out to some incongruences, and I'm just a clown. You can't punish the clown, you can't shoot the messenger. So yeah, these are some of the areas that I try to examine.
Yeah, no, I love your perspective on how the left has kind of become authoritarian, really, and we talk about that on my show a lot. And also, I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong here, but in America now, we are kind of trying to point out that the left, who wants bigger government and more control over the people, and more specific laws and everything, and they want to sort of dictate everything, especially since COVID, they're a lot more like the fascists. They're a lot more like the Nazis. And this idea that they keep saying that, the Nazis were really conservative and the fascists were really right-wing and all this kind of thing. We're like, well, the further you go right, because we want smaller government and we want more liberty, the further you go right, you actually end up, if you go extreme, you would end up going into anarchy, right? And if you would go far to the left, you would end up with totalitarianism. And the left doesn't like us saying that, but I feel like you have a similar perspective.
That's right. There has been a bit of role reversal or value reversal, if you like. And here in Europe, it's pretty much similar. The left has abandoned some of its tenets or values, or some of its key electors. And that's why you have phenomena such as maybe Trump in the US, you had Brexit in the UK, we have people like Berlusconi in the 90s, if you're familiar with Italian politics, with no political background, becoming a prime minister, because at some point the workers, who were supposed to be the key demographics or the key voters of the left, were abandoned by them for the sake of globalism, for the sake of opening the borders. They saw their factories being moved overseas. The left, who for decades had fought, the trade union battles in Europe for, to improve the quality of life of the working class, was suddenly flooding the job market with all this cheap labor coming in and threatening and effectively damaging the quality of life of the native working class. Same with feminism. The left at some point decided to embrace Islam in the name of sticking it to the right, or for whatever reason. Feminism, which was supposed to be about defending women, and who needs more defending than women, for example, in the Middle East or in Islamic countries. But because the oppressor in that case was also brown, was also a non-Western, the left tried to gloss over that and totally ignore that situation. And instead, what have they concentrated on? Gender pay gap. Why female athletes are not getting the same prize money? Why are female razors are a bit more expensive than male razors? And why don't we have blockbuster movies where spies or the baddies are also women? To get why don't they get the same number of Oscar nominations? So all these areas, rather than going after people, women, their sisters, who risk their lives elsewhere in the world. So as a result of that, we have a situation in which the left and the right are not very much distinct from each other. When you look at mainstream political party, we have this in the UK, and of course in America. Why did we have Trump? Because the Republican Party couldn't offer anything to its base anymore. It still can't offer the so-called rhinos, right? And here, the Conservative Party, they are ruling the country. They have been ruling the country for the past 11, 12 years, and yet we have a few hundred illegal migrants getting off on our shores every week, right? So they are, and that's why people define themselves as small c conservative rather than capital C conservative, because the conservatives are like Labour light, and the Labour is like conservative light. They are indistinguishable, and that gives you space for some new movements. It can be Trump, it can be Brexit, or smaller parties in the UK. We will see how it plays out.
Yeah, no, I think that in the UK it is actually considerably worse than in America, because the sort of Trump supporter, it actually started before Trump, that movement, but we called it the Tea Party movement before. But that sort of a movement of conservatives that are what we would call a true conservative as opposed to a rhino, I do think that we've really become the rule as opposed to the exception, and the rhinos and the establishment Republicans are starting to become the exception here in America. And they all know, they sort of been put on notice that if they do not act in the best interest of the American people, if they do act in their best interest, if they act in the best interest of what we call the deep state here in America, they will be ousted. Here's the problem, as I see it, with what you've done. Because what you've done is brave, what you've done is important, what you've done is provocative, what you've done is quality, right? It's very funny. What you've been able to do is excellent. But I don't know how you're going to become a successful, like, where's your career going? I feel like you can't become a comedic actor, right? Which is what most comedians end up being, because the whole industry is left wing. I happen to know personally people in the British film and television industry, and they're even worse than Hollywood. I mean, these industries are unbelievably radically left. They're not just left, they are radically left. So what's your plan, man? Like, what are you thinking?
Well, that's a good point, because there is a marketing aspect to it. I mean, this for me is not a viable profession yet, because although I abandoned my day job, or had to abandon it because they didn't like my comedy, and I was put on final written warning. I am doing other stuff on the side, a bit of journalism, a bit of interpreting. But I thought, there has to be, and this is not just comedy, we have to carve out our own market, and this is where we are going. And people like Daily Wire and Ben Shapiro, they argue that we have believed in the good invisible hand of the market, and as a result, guess what? The left or the woke are taking over the corporations as well. And these corporations can be the ones that manufacture razors or our soaps and shampoos, or the ones that manufacture our movies. So the thing is, we need to carve out our own platforms. We need to make our own. And of course, it's still in its infancy. You mentioned Rumble, for example. I don't know how long my channel on YouTube will last. But actually, if they are pushing us to that direction, we need to come up with our own studios, our own channels, our own platforms, and it might not be good for the society, but whose fault is that? So I thought, rather than trying to become another, milk toast comedian who either panders to the lefty, agenda and doctrines or dogmas, or another comedian who is talking about, dating and airports and, the classic example of, boring joke, airline food and so on. I might as well do something that has value. You know what I mean? And and again, I joke about it. I say, talk about turning a downside into an opportunity. I say, I'm so great at my field because the field is a desert.
Well, that's absolutely right, and 100%. And I'm just totally impressed with you. And I will say, I came to LA to write screenplays and to try to make movies and that kind of thing. And you're 100% right. We need to create conservative media. I talk about this all the time. People don't understand. I was actually just talking about this with Robert Davi, an actor who's in this movie Goonies. He's in Die Hard. He's in all kinds of films from the 80s. We just interviewed him for a show we did. And yeah, we're saying like conservatives don't really understand the power of fiction, the power of comedy, the power of entertainment, how that can shift the culture. You know, young people really rely on that for a lot of their information, a lot of their what they believe in the world, you know, how they perceive the world is through entertainment. So it's very important that we do create conservative media, and we've really dropped the ball on that. I don't think we've done it, but you know, things may be shifting. It's possible there are certain people in Hollywood that may be sort of waking up and, you know, realizing, hey, you know what, actually this lefty woke stuff isn't really working. We need to make some stuff that's a little bit more neutral or even conservative leaning with films like Maverick and stuff like that. I talk about that I have another YouTube channel called Alpha Critic, where I just talk about the direction of Hollywood and movies and TV shows and stuff like that. So I talk about that on that channel all the time. If I ever am able to get one of my projects made, one of my films made, I will remember to try to write a part for you, my friend. Please quickly tell me what happened with your job. You got fired for your views that you were expressing through your stand-up?
Not exactly, but I was told that I couldn't do stand-up because it would have been, as I said, I was working for BBC World Service, and they believed that my stand-up comedy would be jeopardizing their good, impartial, unbiased name. Now, in Italy, we have a saying. We say the law is applied to the enemies and interpreted for the friends. Right? You apply the law to your enemies.
That is perfect.
So, but the idea was, no, if you do this and people come to learn that you are on our payroll or paycheck, this is not good for us. I did a gig in maybe 2018 or 2019, and then The Spectator, which is one of the most, or probably the most prestigious conservative publication in the UK, they featured me in an article entitled "The Best Unwoke Comedy to Watch in Lockdown."
Nice.
And then somebody, you know, my bosses got word of this, and they said, okay, this is your last warning. You can't do this anymore or you'll be fired. So I said, okay, I'll go. Being conservative nowadays means being a punk, you know, being a, you know.
Yeah. I think actually the guys from South Park said that. I used to say that in high school, actually. I said being a conservative is now being rebellious. And then I think that the guys from South Park I once heard say something very similar, where they said being conservative is punk rock, which I thought was quite a funny way. Where can people find you on social media? Do you just want them to subscribe to your YouTube channel, or do you want them to subscribe to your Twitter? Do you do comedy shows internationally, or is it just in the UK? I do have some UK listeners. Yeah, where can people like buy your stuff, or how do I promote you is what I'm saying.
Right now, I am on social media, of course. My YouTube channel is called Anglo-Italian Comedy. And I'm on Twitter, Nico De Santo. I'm on Instagram, Nicholas De Santo. But of course, some more avid fans through YouTube, they subscribe to my Patreon and support me like that. Done only a couple of gigs in the US, which was fantastic. I did it last year, and I'm hoping to do more in the US. But I still haven't toured seriously. That's something I'm looking forward to.
Well, I highly recommend moving out here. I think you're going to have a much bigger audience. Yeah, I think everybody should watch you. I think you're hilarious, and I think you're going to be a big deal. All right, so everybody needs to check out Nicholas De Santo and his amazing comedy at Anglo-Italian Comedy YouTube channel. I don't know. Tell me what you guys think about this guy in the comments below. I think he's fantastic. And remember, it's not that our liberal friends are ignorant. It's just they know so much that is not so. Good night.
There are going to be millions of Democrats that are going to vote with us this time around because they too want that promise kept. It was a promise for less government and less taxes and more freedom for the people.